the bridge with my little boy. On a stormy night, as I wrapped my arms around him to keep away the cold, a black car pulled up. Its headlights cut through the rain like knives. When the door opened, I froze. Stepping out into the downpour was my wealthy father-in-law, the man who had been told I was long gone. His eyes filled with shock and grief. He whispered my name as if he had seen a ghost. My name is Linda Marshall. For 30 years I was a wife who stayed in the shadows of silence. For 30 years I carried hope that my husband would one day see me again with love. Instead, he cast me aside, took the hand of my best friend, and told the world I was dead. What he never imagined was that life had given me a miracle after decades of emptiness. That miracle cried in my arms that night under the bridge, and when his grandfather's gaze fell on the child, the world shifted. Before I take you through the journey that led to that night, let me thank you from my heart. Your support gives me strength to share stories of survival, betrayal, and resilience. Stay with me, because the road from silence to truth is long, filled with heartbreak, and yet lit by moments of grace. I met David Marshall when I was just 22. He had a charming smile, steady eyes, and the kind of confidence that made you believe life would be secure by his side. I was young, hopeful, and I believed marriage meant forever. For a while it felt like it might. We bought a modest house, painted the kitchen together, planted roses in the yard. I thought we were building a life, a future, a family. But months turned into years, and every year carried the same disappointment. I could not conceive a child. Month after month I visited doctors, swallowed pills, prayed on my knees until they ached. Each time the answer was the same: nothing. At first David told me it was all right. He would pat my hand, saying, maybe next year, maybe soon. His voice carried a kind of patience, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Yet patience wears thin. Slowly his words dried up. The comfort faded. Instead came silences that cut sharper than any blade. His eyes grew colder. He began coming home late, his shirt carrying faint traces of perfume I did not own. I knew, but I said nothing. I told myself marriage was not about walking away when it hurt. I told myself vows were made to be honored through better or worse. In those years my refuge was small. I tended to a little garden in the backyard. I planted tulips, daisies, and lavender. I watered them in the mornings, humming softly as though the flowers could hear me. I imagined their petals opening like children's arms reaching for me. It was foolish, maybe, but it was the only place where I felt whole. Neighbors sometimes whispered behind curtains, calling me barren, pitiful. Each word stung, but I buried it deep. I tried to find pride in keeping a clean home, in setting the table each night, in wearing a smile even when my heart was heavy. David, though, stopped noticing those efforts. He stopped noticing me. By the time I was 53, my hair had turned silver at the edges, and my smile felt like an old photograph of a girl I once knew. I was still his wife in name, but in truth I was invisible. 30 years of silence, of waiting for a miracle, had turned me into a shadow in my own home, and I wondered how much longer I could carry on before that shadow swallowed me completely. It was an autumn evening when the silence finally broke. I came in from the garden, dirt still under my fingernails, and found David sitting in the living room. A leather briefcase rested on the coffee table. His face was stern, unmoved, as though he had already rehearsed every word. "Sit down," he said. His tone was cold, unfamiliar. For a fleeting second, my heart leapt with hope. Maybe he was ready to talk. Maybe we could fix what had been breaking for so long. But when he slid a stack of papers across the table, my breath caught. Divorce papers. My hands trembled as I touched them. "David, what is this?" I whispered. 30 years, Linda, he said flatly. 30 years and nothing to show for it. I won't waste another day tied to a mistake. His words struck like stones. Nothing to show? Was my love nothing? Were the meals, the clean home, the nights I stayed awake praying for us, all of it nothing? I wanted to scream, to remind him of the promises we once made, but the sound would not come. My voice was buried under the weight of his disdain. That night, he told me to leave. Just like that. 30 years dissolved as if they had never happened. I walked down the street with a single suitcase, the cold wind slicing through my coat. Windows lit up along the block, neighbors peeking out from behind curtains. No one opened a door. To them, I was the barren wife, discarded like old furniture. Who would want to take me in? A week later, still dazed from the shock, I passed by the house that had once been mine. The driveway was lined with cars, white ribbons draped across the porch, music spilled into the night air. When I asked a neighbor what was happening, her answer knocked the air from my lungs. David married Caroline today, she said with a smile, as if it were good news. Caroline, my closest friend, the woman who once sat in my kitchen and told me to hold on, that things would get better. I stood frozen, staring at the house filled with laughter where I had once set the table. My knees weakened, and the papers in my bag slipped to the ground, divorce papers beside wedding flowers. My husband and my best friend had built their joy on the ruins of my life. The night after their wedding, I wandered the streets until my legs gave out. Hunger gnawed at me, sorrow pressed heavy on my chest, and the cold pierced straight through my bones. I collapsed outside a bus stop and woke to the beeping of hospital monitors. A nurse stood beside me, her face soft with concern. "Mrs. Marshall," she said gently, "you need to rest. You are 6 weeks pregnant." I thought I had misheard. Pregnant? At 53, after 3 decades of disappointment? My hands went to my stomach, trembling. Tears spilled down my cheeks. For years I had begged God for a child, and now, when my life was in ruins, He had placed this miracle inside me. I felt both joy and fear, joy that what had always been denied had finally come. Fear that I had nothing to offer this child, no home, no income, no husband to stand beside me. How could I raise a baby alone? For days I carried the hospital report in my bag, clutching it as though it were proof that I still had worth. I told myself that if David knew, if he saw this miracle, he might take me back. A foolish hope maybe, but hope was all I had left. One afternoon I gathered my courage and walked to the house that was once mine. I wore my best dress, held my head high, and imagined the moment David would look at the papers, his eyes filling with regret. But as I reached the gate, my steps faltered. White ribbons still trailed across the porch. Guests lingered in the yard, laughter rising like cruel music. Caroline's voice rang out from somewhere inside, bright and triumphant. My stomach twisted. This was no place for hope. I turned to leave, but the papers slipped from my bag, scattering across the pavement. A gust of wind lifted one page, carrying the word pregnant across the driveway. No one noticed, no one cared. Guests stepped on the pages, their shoes leaving marks that blurred the ink. I gathered the torn sheets with shaking hands, my chest burning with shame. That was the moment I realized I could never tell David. Not now, not ever. He had chosen his life, and I was not in it. As I walked away from that house, carrying both my unborn child and my broken heart, I whispered to the tiny life inside me. "You are mine," I said. "You are my miracle, and I will protect you no matter the cost." I left the city streets behind and drifted toward the only place that offered cover from the rain, a concrete bridge stretching over a busy highway. The air beneath it was damp, carrying the smell of gasoline and rust. That was where I began my new life, if it could even be called life at all. Nights bled into mornings. I curled up on a piece of cardboard, clutching my growing belly, listening to the roar of cars overhead. Strangers passed by without a glance. To them I was invisible, just another shadow in the cracks of the city. When the time came, labor struck me during a thunderstorm. The wind howled through the cracks in the bridge as if mocking my cries. I had no doctor, no nurse, no hand to hold. Alone, trembling, I pushed through the hours of pain until at dawn, a cry split the silence. A small, fragile boy entered the world, his breath shallow but determined. I wrapped him in my coat, tears streaming down my face. "Michael," I whispered, "that is your name. Because you are my gift, my proof that God has heard me." From that moment forward, my life was no longer mine. Every ounce of strength belonged to him. The days that followed were brutal. I'd begged on street corners, my arms aching from holding him close. Some strangers dropped coins into my cup. Others spat cruel words, telling me to move on, to disappear. But I endured it all for Michael. I worked wherever I could, washing clothes in back alleys, sweeping floors for shopkeepers, collecting scraps from garbage bins. Every penny went to keep Michael fed, even if it meant I went hungry. On the coldest nights I wrapped him in thin blankets and pressed him against my chest, whispering lullabies to keep the darkness away. Meanwhile, rumors reached me like poison carried by the wind. David had told everyone, even his wealthy father, that I was dead. He staged an entire funeral, tears streaming as he stood beside Caroline, his new bride. Neighbors said it was a beautiful ceremony, filled with flowers and sympathy. They believed him. The world mourned me while I lay alive under a bridge, holding our son. The cruelty of it cut deep. He had buried me with lies, erased me from the family, and stolen my dignity. Yet, whenever I looked at Michael's tiny face, I found reason to keep breathing. His smile, though rare in those hard days, lit up the darkness like a lantern. 2 years passed slowly, painfully. Michael grew taller, his eyes bright with curiosity even as his body shivered through winters. He learned to giggle at the sound of pigeons flapping overhead, to chase scraps of paper as though they were toys. I watched him and thought, if he can find joy in this, then I can endure. I was weary, hungry, invisible to the world. But as long as Michael's hand clutched mine, I refused to surrender. My love was his shelter, even when our home was nothing more than the shadows beneath a bridge. It was another stormy night, one of many. Rain leaked through the cracks above, dripping into small pools around us. Michael, now 2 years old, coughed weakly in my arms. His little chest rattled with each breath and panic clawed at me. I held him tighter, rocking him back and forth. "Stay with me, baby. Please stay with me," I whispered. My prayers were swallowed by the roar of traffic overhead. Then headlights pierced the darkness. A sleek black car slowed near the bridge and came to a stop. My body froze. No one ever stopped here, not for someone like me. The door opened, and through the rain stepped a tall man with silver hair wearing a heavy coat. My breath caught in my throat. It was Charles Marshall, David's father, the patriarch of the family, a man of immense wealth and power. I had not seen him in years. He looked around, his eyes falling on me, then dropping to the small bundle in my arms. His face went pale. "Linda," he whispered, his voice breaking. You were supposed to be gone." Tears blurred my vision. I could not speak, only hold Michael closer. The boy stirred, coughing again, his small hand twitching against my chest. Charles staggered forward as if the ground beneath him had vanished. He fell to his knees in the mud beside me. His hand reached out, trembling, and brushed against my cheek. "My son lied to me," he said hoarsely. "He told me you were dead. He made me mourn you." His eyes shifted to Michael, widening with shock. "And this child, he is David's." I nodded, unable to force out a word past my sobs. The rain soaked through his expensive coat, but he did not care. He pressed a hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. I had never seen him cry, not once, yet there, under the bridge, he wept for the years stolen from us. Finally, he looked at me with fierce determination. "You are coming with me. Both of you. Tonight." I tried to protest, whispering that I had nothing, no clothes, no papers, nowhere I belonged. But his voice thundered, steady and unyielding. "You belong to my family. And no one, not even my son, can erase that." With his help, I rose to my feet. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the darkness. The car ride to the Marshall estate felt unreal. I sat on leather seats that smelled of wealth and comfort, clutching Michael close as he drifted into uneasy sleep. Streetlights streaked across the windows, blurring like memories I could hardly grasp. I kept expecting to wake up back under the bridge, but the hum of the engine carried us further away from the shadows that had defined my life. When we arrived, the mansion loomed before us, its iron gates swinging open as though welcoming us home. I had walked past those gates once after David's wedding, too ashamed to step closer. Now I was being led through them by the man of the house himself. Inside, warmth wrapped around us. The scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air. A maid gasped when she saw me, nearly dropping a tray. Charles barked orders with authority. Blankets, food, medicine for the boy, quickly. Within minutes, Michael lay in a soft bed, his small frame wrapped in clean blankets. Doctors were summoned. They examined him with care I could never have afforded. I sat by his side, stroking his hair, still half afraid someone would tell me to leave. But instead, Charles stood in the doorway, his eyes stormy with grief and resolve. "You suffered like this," he said softly, "while my son and that woman lived in luxury." His jaw tightened. "This is unforgivable." That night he brought me a tray of food himself. I ate slowly, tears spilling with every bite. For 2 years I had begged to beg for scraps, and here I was, served like I still mattered. He sat across from me, his gaze fixed on Michael. "I wronged you too," he admitted. "I should have asked more questions. I should have known better than to trust David completely." I shook my head. "You believed your son. How could you know?" But inside I felt a flicker of gratitude. For the first time, someone admitted fault. For the first time, I was no longer invisible. In the days that followed, Charles made his intentions clear. He would not allow lies to rot his family any longer. One evening, as we sat near the fireplace, he turned to me, his face calm but his eyes burning with determination. "I am hosting a dinner," he said. "Business associates, extended family, even David and Caroline will be there. And at that dinner, the truth will finally be spoken." My stomach clenched. The thought of facing David and Caroline again filled me with dread. But when I looked at Michael asleep on the couch, I knew we could not hide forever. Yes, I whispered. Let the world know. The night of the dinner came quickly. A driver brought us to the mansion. I dressed in a simple navy gown, nothing extravagant, but enough to remind myself I was no longer the broken woman beneath a bridge. Michael clung to my hand as we stepped into the grand hall. Chandeliers glowed above, casting golden light over polished wood and sparkling crystal. Guests filled the room with laughter until they saw me. Conversation stopped. Forks clattered onto plates. One woman gasped, "Isn't that Linda? But she's supposed to be dead." Heat rushed to my cheeks, but I held my head high. Michael pressed against my side, his small hand warm in mine. Then I saw them, David and Caroline, standing near the head of the table. David wore a tailored suit, his arm draped around Caroline, as though she were his trophy. Caroline's smile collapsed the moment her eyes met mine. Her face drained of color, and she stumbled back as though she had seen a ghost. David froze, his jaw tightening, fists clenching at his sides. For once he had no words. The room fell silent as Charles rose. He tapped his glass lightly, commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "thank you for joining me tonight. This dinner is not only for business, it is for family. And tonight you will hear the truth about mine." Gasps rippled across the hall. Charles's gaze swept the room before landing on me. "2 years ago you attended a funeral. You mourned my daughter-in-law. You offered comfort, because we were told she had died. But that funeral was built on a lie." His voice grew sharper. "Linda did not die. She was cast aside, betrayed, abandoned, while my son and this woman," he pointed directly at Caroline, "paraded in luxury on the grave they dug for her." Caroline let out a strangled sob. David's face turned crimson, but he said nothing. Charles's hand lifted toward Michael. My boy peeked up at the crowd nervously. "And while they lived their lie," Charles continued, "Linda carried my son's child. She raised him in poverty and shame, while I mourned a woman who was very much alive." He beckoned to Michael. "Come here, grandson." Michael hesitated, then stepped forward. Charles lifted him into his arms and raised his voice. "This is Michael Marshall, my grandson, my heir, the true blood of this family." The hall erupted, gasps, whispers, even applause from some. David finally shouted, "She's lying. That child." Silence. Charles's roar shook the walls. "You lied to me, to the world, and you buried your wife alive. You disgust me." The truth hung heavy in the air. For the first time in decades, I was no longer erased. I was undeniable. The days after the dinner were filled with whispers. Some guests wrote letters of apology for believing David's lies. Others avoided me, too ashamed to meet my eyes. None of it mattered. What mattered was that Michael's place in the family had been restored. But David could not let go of his defeat. 2 mornings later, he stormed into my quarters without knocking. His hair was disheveled, his face pale with fury. Caroline trailed behind him, her mascara smudged, her expression broken. "What have you done?" David hissed. "Do you think parroting that boy around changes anything? Do you think it makes him mine, makes him worthy?" Michael was sitting on the rug, pushing toy cars across the floor. At the sound of his father's voice, his little face lit up. "Daddy," he said softly. My heart clenched. He didn't understand the venom in that word. He didn't understand the cruelty that stood in front of him. For a brief moment, David froze. The word daddy seemed to cut through his armor. But then his sneer returned. "Don't call me that," he snapped. Michael's smile faded. He lowered his head and rolled his toy car in silence. Rage surged inside me. I rose to my feet, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "Get out, David, you've done enough damage." Caroline stepped forward, her tears falling freely. "Linda, please, we thought you were." "Don't," I cut her off. "You knew. You both knew what you were doing, and you chose it." David's face twisted darker. "Do you think Father will protect you forever? He's old. One day he'll be gone, and then everything is mine again. You'll be nothing." I met his glare head on. "No, David, you lost everything the moment you betrayed me. The son you tried to erase is the very thing you can never destroy." Charles entered the room just as David lunged forward. The strike of his cane against the marble floor thundered through the hall. His voice was sharp, cold. "If you touch her, David, I will disown you before the sun sets." David froze, his chest heaving, but Charles's gaze pinned him like steel. "I built this empire," he continued, his tone fierce, "and I will tear it apart before I let you inherit it. From this day forward, everything, every title, every stone, Every dollar belongs to Linda and Michael. You are no longer my son, you are dead to me. The words hung heavy final. David's face drained of color. For the first time I saw fear in him, not arrogance. Caroline broke into sobs, clutching his arm, but Charles turned away, his command unwavering. Leave this house, both of you, tonight. And so they did. I watched from the balcony as David and Caroline dragged their suitcases into the night. He looked back once, eyes burning with hatred, but said nothing. She clung to him, pale and broken. Their kingdom of lies had crumbled. I should have felt triumph. I should have rejoiced in their downfall. But as I held Michael in my arms, all I felt was sorrow. For decades I had begged for David's love, prayed for even a fragment of kindness. And in the end, all that remained between us was ash. Life inside the estate shifted. Tutors came for Michael, trust funds were prepared in his name, and Charles introduced me to his business partners as the matriarch of the family. The staff, who once whispered cruelly about me, now bowed with respect. Yet at night, when the halls grew quiet, I often sat by the window, remembering the years that had been stolen. No amount of justice could return them. Still, when Michael laughed, when he reached for my hand with his small, warm fingers, I knew the suffering had not been in vain. He was my reason, my redemption, and the living proof that truth cannot be buried forever. As the years passed, Michael grew tall and kind, the kind of man his father never learned to be. Watching him carry the Marshall name with dignity reminded me that justice does not erase the pain, but it does give strength to stand tall again. If you have ever faced betrayal, remember this: the truth may take years, even decades, but it always rises. And when it does, you must be ready to stand in the light, not as the broken soul left behind, but as the survivor you have become. Like, share, and comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories of resilience.